The scream tore through the afternoon air like a bullet, and Vincent Nash knew before he even looked up from his saddle repair that something terrible had just happened. He dropped the leather strap and ran toward the sound, his boots kicking up dust on the main street of Salina, Kansas. A small crowd had already gathered outside the general store, and through the cluster of concerned faces, he could see a woman on her knees in the dirt, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. Vincent pushed through gently, his tall frame parting the onlookers with ease. The woman was young, maybe 23 or 24, with dark hair that had come loose from its pins, and now fell around her face in waves. Her dress was modest but well made, the kind a respectable married woman would wear, and her hands were clutched to her chest as if trying to hold her heart inside. "They took it," she gasped between sobs. "They just rode up and grabbed my hand and pulled it right off. My wedding ring. Thomas gave it to me. It was his grandmother's. Oh God, it was all I had left of him." Vincent knelt beside her, his weathered face creasing with concern. "Madam, who took it? When did this happen?" She looked up at him with eyes so filled with pain that it struck him like a physical blow. They were green, he noticed, the color of new grass after spring rain. "3 men," she said, her voice raw. "Not 5 minutes ago. They rode in fast, and one of them just grabbed my hand as I was coming out of the store. He twisted the ring off before I could even scream. Then they laughed and rode out heading west." The shopkeeper, Mr. Henderson, stepped forward, wringing his hands. "It's true, Nash. I saw it from inside. Mean-looking fellows on horses that looked like they had been ridden hard. The one who took the ring had a scar across his left cheek, and he was missing 2 fingers on his right hand. They were armed to the teeth." Vincent helped the woman to her feet. She swayed slightly, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "What's your name, madam?" "Lily," she whispered. "Lily Edwards. I came to Salina 3 months ago after my husband died of fever back in Missouri. I thought I could start fresh here, but that ring was the only thing I had to remember him by. It was all I had." Something in Vincent's chest tightened. He had seen grief before, plenty of it out here in Kansas, where life was hard and death came easy. But there was something about the way this woman looked at him, the desperate hope flickering behind her tears, that made him want to move mountains to help her. "I will get it back for you," he said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. Lily's eyes widened. "You cannot. They look dangerous. I cannot ask you to risk your life for a piece of jewelry." "You are not asking, I am offering." Vincent glanced at the western horizon where dust still hung in the air from the bandits' departure. "I have been tracking men across this territory for 7 years, Mrs. Edwards. I know how they think, and I know how to find them. Those men made a mistake when they hurt someone in this town." He did not add that he had his own reasons for hating bandits, that 5 years ago a gang had robbed a stagecoach and killed his younger brother, who had been riding shotgun. He did not mention that tracking down bad men had become something of a calling for him ever since, a way to make sense of a senseless loss. "But I have no money to pay you," Lily said, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Vincent shook his head. "I do not want your money. I want you to go to the boarding house and rest. When I come back, I will have your ring." He turned to go, but she caught his sleeve. Her hand was small and warm even through the fabric of his shirt. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" He looked down at her, at the tear tracks on her dusty face, at the vulnerability and strength warring in her expression. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply. Then he tipped his hat and strode toward the stable where his horse waited. 20 minutes later, Vincent was riding west at a steady pace, his eyes scanning the ground for tracks. The 3 horses had left a clear trail in the dry Kansas soil, heading away from town through the open prairie. He could tell from the depth of the hoofprints that the riders were pushing their mounts hard, probably trying to put distance between themselves and any pursuit. The afternoon sun beat down on his shoulders as he rode, the landscape rolling out in endless waves of golden grass dotted with occasional stands of cottonwood trees. This was 1882, and Kansas was still wild enough that men could ride through for days without seeing another soul. That isolation worked both ways, though. It made it harder for bandits to hide when someone like Vincent was on their trail. He had learned tracking from a Cheyenne man named Running Deer back when he first came to Kansas as a young man of 18. Running Deer had taught him to read the land like a book, to see the stories written in bent grass and disturbed soil. Vincent could tell from the tracks that one of the horses was favoring its left front leg slightly, probably an old injury that had never healed quite right. That would slow them down eventually. As he rode, his mind kept drifting back to Lily Edwards. There had been something in her eyes, a depth of feeling that resonated with his own buried grief. He understood what it meant to lose something precious, to have the past torn away and be left grasping at memories. The wedding ring was not just jewelry to her. It was a talisman, a physical link to a love that death had stolen. The sun was starting to sink toward the horizon when Vincent spotted something that made him pull his horse to a stop. A small campfire, recently extinguished, with 3 distinct boot prints around it. The bandits had stopped here to rest their horses and likely divide any loot they had taken. Vincent dismounted and examined the ground carefully. There were cigarette butts scattered near the fire, and the remains of what looked like jerky and hardtack. These men were not professionals, he realized. Professional thieves would not have stopped so soon, would not have left such an obvious trail. These were probably drifters, opportunistic criminals who saw an easy target and took their chance. That made them dangerous in a different way. Professionals had rules, codes they followed. Desperate men were unpredictable. Vincent swung back into his saddle and continued following the trail. The tracks led northwest now, toward rougher country where the prairie gave way to broken land, cut through with ravines and rocky outcroppings. It was good ambush country, and Vincent's hand moved instinctively to check his revolver. He had no intention of shooting anyone if he could avoid it. Violence had a way of spreading like wildfire, leaving nothing but ash in its wake. But he would defend himself if necessary, and he would not let 3 thieves keep what they had stolen from a grieving widow. The light was fading to purple twilight when Vincent spotted the glow of another campfire in the distance. He dismounted and approached on foot, leading his horse and moving as quietly as possible through the grass. As he got closer, he could hear voices carrying on the evening air. "Should have taken more than just a ring," one man was saying, his voice rough and gravelly. "Could have grabbed that woman's whole purse. Too many witnesses," another replied. "Besides, this ring might be worth something. Looks like real gold." Vincent's jaw tightened. He tied his horse to a scrubby bush and moved closer, using the darkness as cover. There were 3 men around the fire, just as Lily had said. One was examining something small that caught the firelight, turning it over in his fingers. The wedding ring. The man holding it was the one with the scarred face Henderson had mentioned. He had a cruel look about him, the kind of face that had seen too much meanness and learned to enjoy it. The other 2 looked younger, maybe still in their 20s, with the restless energy of men who had not yet learned that some paths led nowhere good. Vincent considered his options. He could wait until they slept and try to steal the ring back, but that risked waking them and starting a gunfight. He could try to negotiate, but men like these rarely responded to reason. Or he could be direct. He stepped into the firelight with his hands visible and empty. "Evening, gentlemen." All three men jumped up, hands flying to their weapons. Vincent kept his movements slow and deliberate. "I am not looking for trouble. I am looking for something you took from a woman in Salina today. A gold wedding ring. I would like to buy it from you." The scarred man laughed, though his hand stayed on his gun. "And why would we sell something we took for free?" "Because I am offering you a way out of this that does not end badly for anyone," Vincent said calmly. "You took something from a widow who has already lost her husband. That ring means nothing to you except whatever money you can get for it. I will give you $50 for it right now, and you can ride on without any more trouble." $50 was most of what Vincent had saved over the past month, but it seemed worth it to avoid violence and to see the look on Lily's face when he returned what had been stolen. The younger men exchanged glances, clearly tempted. $50 was good money, more than they would likely get from a fence for a single ring. But the scarred man shook his head. "I think there is more to this story," he said, his eyes narrowing. "I think maybe this ring is worth more than $50 if some cowboy is willing to ride all this way and offer that much. Maybe it has diamonds we have not seen, or maybe it belongs to someone important." Vincent sighed inwardly. He had hoped they would be smart enough to take the easy way, but he had prepared for this too. "The ring is gold with a small garnet stone. It belonged to the dead husband's grandmother. It has sentimental value, not monetary value, but if you will not sell it, I will have to take it." The scarred man's face twisted into an ugly smile. "You and what army, Cowboy?" "Just me," Vincent said quietly, "and I am asking you not to make me prove it." For a moment, everything hung in balance. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkness. The three bandits were armed and had numbers on their side. Vincent was alone with only his reputation and his determination. Then one of the younger men spoke up, his voice nervous. "Jack, maybe we should take his money. $50 is $50, and we did not even plan this job. It was just something that happened." The scarred man, Jack, glared at his companion. "Shut up, Tommy, I make the decisions." He turned back to Vincent and his hand tightened on his gun. "I think we will keep the ring and your $50. In fact, I think we will take your horse and your boots too. Teach you not to stick your nose where it does not belong." Vincent had been in enough tight situations to recognize when words had run their course. His hand moved in a blur, drawing his revolver and firing in one smooth motion. The gun flew out of Jack's hand, the bullet striking metal with a sharp clang that echoed across the prairie. Before the other two could react, Vincent had his gun trained on them. "Do not," he said simply. The younger men froze, their hands halfway to their weapons. Jack was clutching his hand where the recoil from his gun being shot had hurt his grip, his face twisted in shock and rage. "You are going to give me the ring," Vincent said, his voice steady. "Then you are going to ride away from here and never come back to Salina or anywhere near it. If I see any of you again, I will not aim for the gun next time." Tommy, the young man who had spoken before, slowly reached down and picked up the ring from where Jack had dropped it by the fire. He held it out to Vincent, his hand shaking slightly. "We do not want trouble, mister. We will leave. Just let us go." Vincent moved forward carefully, keeping his gun level, and took the ring. It was warm from being near the fire, a simple gold band with a dark red garnet set in the center. He could see tiny scratches on the inside where it had been worn for years, the marks of a life lived and lost. "Get on your horses," he said. "All three of you, and ride north. If you turn south toward Salina, I will assume you are coming back for revenge, and I will respond accordingly." They moved quickly, Jack nursing his bruised hand and shooting Vincent looks of pure hatred. But hatred was one thing. Actual violence was another, and all three men had seen how fast Vincent could move. They mounted up and rode into the darkness without another word. Vincent waited until he could no longer hear their hoofbeats before he let out a long breath. His heart was pounding, the aftermath of confrontation flooding his system with tension. He had meant what he said about not wanting violence, but he had also meant what he said about getting the ring back. He looked down at the small piece of gold in his palm, this thing that meant so much to a woman he barely knew. In the firelight, it seemed to glow with its own warmth, a circle of promises made and kept even beyond death. Vincent kicked dirt over the bandits' fire and walked back to where his horse waited. The night was full dark now, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. It would be dangerous to ride back in the dark, easy to miss the trail or have his horse step in a prairie dog hole. The smart thing would be to camp here and head back at first light. But something in him wanted to keep moving, to return to Selena, and put that look of relief on Lily Edwards' face as soon as possible. He mounted up and pointed his horse east, trusting the animal's instincts and the faint light of the rising moon to guide them home. The ride back took most of the night. Vincent dozed in the saddle sometimes, the rocking motion of his horse's gait familiar enough that he could sleep without falling. He had learned that trick years ago when he worked as a ranch hand, driving cattle across endless miles of open country. Dawn was breaking over Selena when he finally rode back into town, painting the false-fronted buildings in shades of pink and gold. The streets were empty except for a few early risers, and Vincent headed straight for the boarding house where he hoped Lily had taken his advice to rest. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house, opened the door at his knock with a suspicious look that softened when she recognized him. "Mr. Nash, you look like you have been riding all night." "I have," he admitted. "Is Mrs. Edwards still here?" "She is in the dining room having breakfast." Poor thing barely slept. She was up before dawn. Mrs. Patterson stepped aside to let him enter, her eyes curious but tactful enough not to ask questions. Vincent found Lily sitting at a long table near a window, a cup of coffee untouched in front of her. She was staring out at the morning light, her profile sad and distant. She had changed into a different dress, a simple gray one that made her look even more fragile than before. She looked up when she heard his footsteps and her eyes went wide. "Mr. Nash, you are back." He crossed to her table and held out his hand, opening his fingers to reveal the ring resting in his palm. "I believe this belongs to you." Lily's face went through a dozen emotions in as many seconds: disbelief, hope, joy, and then tears. She reached out with a trembling hand and took the ring, holding it up to the light as if to confirm it was real. "You got it back," she whispered. "You really got it back. I said I would." Vincent pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, suddenly aware of how tired he was. His body ached from a night in the saddle, and his eyes felt full of sand. Lily slipped the ring onto her finger, and something in her seemed to settle, as if a missing piece had been returned to its proper place. She looked at Vincent with such gratitude that it made him uncomfortable. "How can I ever thank you? You risked your life for this." "It was not that much risk," Vincent said, though they both knew that was not entirely true. "And seeing you smile is thanks enough." And she was smiling, despite the tears still running down her cheeks. It transformed her face, made her beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with features and everything to do with the joy shining through her grief. "Tell me about your husband," Vincent said impulsively. "If you want to, I mean. You do not have to." Lily looked down at the ring on her finger, turning it slowly. "His name was Thomas. We grew up together in Missouri, got married when I was 19. He was kind and gentle, and he loved to read. He always said we would grow old together, have a house full of children and grandchildren." Her voice caught. But then the fever came, and in 3 days he was gone. The doctor said there was nothing anyone could have done. "I am sorry," Vincent said, and meant it. "Losing someone you love is the hardest thing in the world." Lily looked up at him, and there was a new curiosity in her eyes. "You sound like you are speaking from experience." Vincent hesitated, then nodded. "My younger brother, Daniel. He was shot by bandits 5 years ago. He was only 22, had his whole life ahead of him. I was supposed to be riding that stage coach with him, but I had taken another job at the last minute. Sometimes I think if I had been there, maybe I could have done something." "And that is why you do this," Lily said softly. "Why you chase after thieves and bring back what they have stolen. You are trying to make up for what you could not do for your brother." Her insight was startling and uncomfortable. Vincent had never put it into words quite like that, but she was right. Every time he tracked down a criminal, every time he helped someone in trouble, he was trying to fill a hole that could never be filled. "Maybe," he admitted. "Or maybe I just do not like seeing bad men get away with hurting good people." Mrs. Patterson appeared with a plate of eggs and bacon, which she set in front of Vincent with a knowing look. "You need to eat, Mr. Nash. You look about ready to fall over." Vincent realized he was starving. He had not eaten since yesterday afternoon, and the smell of the food made his stomach growl. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson." Lily watched him eat for a moment, then said, "Will you tell me what happened? How you found them?" Between bites, Vincent told her about the trail, the confrontation at the campfire, the tense moment when everything could have gone wrong. He left out some of the more frightening details, not wanting to worry her, but she seemed to understand what he was not saying. "You could have been killed," she said when he finished. "But I was not." Vincent pushed his empty plate away, feeling more human now that he had food in his stomach. "And now you have your ring back." Lily reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her touch was light but deliberate, and it sent a warmth through him that had nothing to do with the hot coffee. "You are a remarkable man, Vincent Nash." He felt his face heat up, unaccustomed to such direct praise. "I am just a cowboy who knows how to track." "You are more than that," Lily said firmly. "You are someone who keeps his word, who risks himself for strangers, who understands loss and grief and still chooses to help others. That is not common." Vincent did not know what to say to that, so he just looked at her. In the morning light streaming through the window, she was lovely in a way that made his chest tighten. There were shadows under her eyes from lack of sleep, and her hair was still not quite properly pinned, with little wisps escaping to curl around her face. But there was a strength in her, a resilience that had survived tragedy and was still capable of gratitude and hope. "What will you do now?" he asked. "Here in Salina, I mean." Lily withdrew her hand, and he missed the warmth immediately. "I have been working at the schoolhouse, helping the teacher with the younger children. She is getting older and needs assistance. It does not pay much, but it is enough to cover my room here and meals. I like the work. Children are honest in their emotions, and they do not pity me for being a widow." "That sounds like good work," Vincent said. "Salina could use more people like you." "And what about you?" Lily asked. "What do you do when you are not chasing down bandits?" "I have a small ranch about 5 miles outside of town. Just me and some cattle, a few horses. I do tracking work sometimes when the local sheriff needs help or when someone needs finding. It is a quiet life, mostly." "It sounds lonely," Lily said gently. Vincent shrugged, uncomfortable with how easily she saw through him. "I am used to it." They sat in silence for a moment, the morning sounds of the boarding house waking up around them. Other guests were beginning to come down for breakfast, and Mrs. Patterson was bustling between the kitchen and dining room with more food. Finally, Lily stood up. "I should let you rest. You must be exhausted." Vincent rose as well, his body protesting the movement. Now that he had stopped moving, the weariness was catching up with him fast. "I am going to head back to my ranch. But Mrs. Edwards, if you ever need anything, anything at all, you can send word and I will come." "I will remember that," Lily said. She paused, then added, "And Mr. Nash, thank you. Not just for the ring, but for reminding me that there are still good people in the world." Vincent tipped his hat to her and left before he could say something foolish. But as he rode out of town toward his ranch, her words echoed in his mind. There was something about Lily Edwards that had gotten under his skin, a connection he could not quite name but definitely felt. He told himself it was just sympathy, one grieving person recognizing another. But when he finally fell into bed in his small ranch house and closed his eyes, it was her face he saw, her smile that warmed him as he drifted into sleep. The next few weeks fell into a new rhythm. Vincent focused on his ranch work, mending fences and checking on his cattle, but he found himself riding into Salina more often than usual. He told himself he needed supplies or had to talk to the sheriff about a potential job, but the truth was harder to admit. He wanted to see Lily. He would catch glimpses of her walking to the schoolhouse in the mornings or shopping at the general store, and each time his heart would do something strange in his chest. Once he saw her reading to a group of children under a tree, her voice carrying on the breeze, and he stopped his horse just to listen. She would wave when she saw him, and sometimes they would talk for a few minutes about nothing important. The weather, news from back east, how her work at the school was going. Small conversations that felt larger than their content, weighted with things neither of them was ready to say. Vincent was not good at reading people's feelings, especially when it came to matters of the heart. He had loved a girl once when he was younger, but she had married a banker and moved to Chicago. Since then, he had kept himself distant from that kind of complication. But Lily made him want to try again, to risk the possibility of hurt for the chance at something real. He just did not know if she felt the same way, or if she was still too wrapped up in grief for her late husband to consider anyone else. One Saturday afternoon, in late June, Vincent was in the general store buying coffee and flour when Lily came in. She was wearing a pale blue dress that brought out the green in her eyes, and her hair was pinned up neatly under a simple straw hat. "Mr. Nash," she said with a smile, "I was hoping I might run into you." His heart jumped. "Mrs. Edwards, is something wrong?" "No, nothing wrong." She glanced around the store, then lowered her voice. "I was wondering if I could ask you something. A favor, actually, of course. Anything." Lily bit her lip, a gesture that made her look younger and more uncertain. "The school is having a social next Saturday evening, and I wondered if you might be willing to attend. Some of the townspeople have been very kind to me, but I still do not know many people, and it would be nice to have a friendly face there." Vincent felt a rush of pleasure so strong it almost made him dizzy. "I would be honored to attend. Really," Lily's face lit up. "I was worried you might think it too silly, a school social." "I think it sounds fine," Vincent said, meaning it. He would have agreed to attend a barn raising in hell if it meant spending time with Lily Edwards. They made arrangements to meet at the schoolhouse that Saturday evening, and Vincent left the store feeling like he was walking on air. It was only later, when he was riding back to his ranch, that he realized she had called it a social, and he had no idea what one wore to such an event. His ranch clothes were practical but worn, and he had only one good shirt that was not stained or torn. He spent the next week in a state of nervous anticipation, working his ranch during the day and thinking about Lily at night. He even rode to the next town over to buy a new shirt from the dry goods store there, something he had not done in years. The shopkeeper had given him a knowing look, but had not commented on why a solitary rancher suddenly needed new clothes. Saturday evening arrived warm and clear, with the sun setting in streaks of orange and purple across the western sky. Vincent washed and shaved carefully, put on his new shirt and his least-worn pants, and rode into Salina feeling more nervous than he had when facing down those 3 bandits. The schoolhouse was lit up with lanterns, and music drifted out through the open windows. Vincent could hear fiddle and guitar, voices raised in laughter and conversation. He tied his horse to the rail outside and straightened his shirt one more time before heading in. The interior had been transformed. The desks had been pushed back against the walls, and the center of the room was cleared for dancing. Tables along one side held food, platters of fried chicken and biscuits, bowls of potato salad and beans, and an impressive array of pies and cakes. It seemed like half the town had turned out. Vincent spotted Lily almost immediately. She was standing near the refreshment table talking to Mrs. Patterson and the schoolteacher, Miss Sarah Brennan. When Lily saw him, her whole face brightened, and she excused herself to come over. "You came," she said, and there was genuine happiness in her voice. "I said I would," Vincent replied. Up close, he could see that she was wearing the same blue dress from the general store, but she had added a white shawl and her hair was arranged in a softer style that framed her face. She looked beautiful, and he had to remind himself to breathe. "Come on, I will introduce you to some people," Lily said, taking his arm in a gesture that felt both natural and thrilling. For the next hour, Vincent met more Salina residents than he had in his previous 7 years living nearby. Lily guided him through the room, making introductions and drawing him into conversations. He had always been more comfortable with horses than people, but with her beside him, it was easier. She had a gift for making others feel at ease, for finding common ground even with strangers. When the music shifted to a waltz, Lily turned to him with a slightly shy expression. "Would you dance with me? Unless you do not dance, which would be perfectly fine." "I dance," Vincent said, which was mostly true. He knew the basic steps, had learned them years ago at his brother's wedding. He just had not danced in a very long time. He led her onto the floor, painfully aware of everyone watching. But the moment he put his hand on her waist and took her other hand in his, the rest of the room seemed to fade away. They moved together, tentatively at first and then with growing confidence. "You are a good dancer," Lily said, looking up at him. "You sound surprised." "I am a little," she admitted with a small laugh. "You seem like the kind of man who would be more comfortable on a horse than a dance floor." "I am," Vincent said. "But some things are worth being uncomfortable for." Lily's expression grew more serious, and something passed between them, an understanding that this was more than just a dance between friends. "Vincent, I need to tell you something." His heart sank, expecting her to say she was leaving Salina, or that she could never think of him as anything but the man who returned her ring. "What is it?" "I have been thinking about you," she said quietly. "A lot, actually, more than I probably should. I was married to Thomas, and I loved him deeply. But he has been gone for 4 months now, and lately when I think about the future, I do not see it empty anymore. I see possibilities, and you are part of those possibilities." Vincent nearly stumbled in the dance, so caught off guard that his feet forgot their steps. "Lily, I have been thinking about you too, every day since I brought back your ring. I know it might seem too soon, that people will talk, but I cannot help how I feel." "And how do you feel?" she asked, her eyes searching his face. He took a breath and said the truth he had been carrying. "I feel like I have been waiting my whole life to meet you. Like every path I took was leading me to that moment outside the general store when you needed help. I know I am just a rancher, and I do not have fancy words or a big house in town, but I would like the chance to show you that I could make you happy if you would let me." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I would like that chance too. I do not need fancy words or a big house. I need someone who is honest and brave and kind, someone who understands loss but still believes in hope. You are that person, Vincent." Right there in the middle of the school social, with half of Selena watching, Vincent leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle and brief, but it felt like a promise, like the beginning of something that could last. When they broke apart, there were smiles all around the room and someone even clapped. Lily laughed. Her cheeks flushed pink and hid her face against Vincent's shoulder. "I think we just gave the town something to talk about." "Let them talk," Vincent said, feeling happier than he had in years. "I do not care about gossip, I only care about you." They danced until late in the evening, only stopping when the musicians needed to rest. Vincent met more people, learned more names, and for the first time since coming to Kansas, he felt like he was part of a community rather than just a man passing through. When it was time to leave, he walked Lily back to the boarding house under a sky full of stars. They held hands and talked about everything and nothing, comfortable in the growing connection between them. At the door to the boarding house, Lily turned to him. "Will I see you tomorrow?" "Tomorrow and every day after if you want," Vincent said. "I want," she replied softly. Then she stood on her toes and kissed his cheek before slipping inside, leaving him standing there with a smile he could not wipe off his face. The courtship that followed was the happiest time of Vincent's life. He came to town every Sunday to take Lily to church, and they would spend the afternoon walking together or sitting under the cottonwood trees talking. He learned that she loved poetry and could recite long passages from memory. She learned that he had a quiet sense of humor and a deep love for the land that showed in the way he talked about his ranch. On Saturdays, he would come into town early and help her with errands, carrying heavy packages and making sure she had everything she needed. Sometimes she would ride out to his ranch, and he would show her the work he was doing, the plans he had for expanding his herd and maybe building a bigger house someday. They talked about their pasts, about the people they had lost, and the scars those losses had left. Vincent learned that Lily had wanted children desperately, that she and Thomas had been trying when he got sick. She learned that Vincent had once dreamed of traveling, of seeing the ocean and the mountains, but had found a home in Kansas that he could not imagine leaving. It was not always easy. Sometimes Lily would grow quiet and distant, lost in memories of Thomas. Sometimes Vincent would push too hard for her to commit to plans she was not ready to make. But they learned to navigate these moments, to give each other space while also offering support. By late summer, Vincent knew he wanted to marry her. He had known it after their first real conversation, if he was honest, but now it felt like something he needed to act on before fear or doubt could interfere. The problem was the ring. Lily already had a wedding ring, the one he had retrieved from the Bandits. It was her connection to Thomas, and Vincent did not want to ask her to replace it. But he also wanted to give her something new, something that represented their future together rather than her past. He wrestled with the question for days before finally talking to Mrs. Patterson about it one afternoon. The boarding house matron had taken a friendly interest in his courtship of Lily, and he trusted her advice. "Give her a ring that she can wear alongside Thomas's ring," Mrs. Patterson suggested. "Something that honors her past while celebrating her future. Not a replacement, but an addition." It was perfect. Vincent rode to the jeweler in Junction City, the nearest big town, and spent a long time looking at different rings. Finally, he chose a simple silver band with a small diamond. It was elegant without being showy, and the jeweler assured him it would sit well next to a gold band. On a Sunday in September, with the prairie grass turning gold and the air carrying the first hints of autumn, Vincent took Lily on a picnic out to his favorite spot on his ranch. It was a rise overlooking a creek, with a view that stretched for miles in every direction. They sat on a blanket eating fried chicken and biscuits, talking and laughing. Then, when the moment felt right, Vincent pulled the ring from his pocket and held it out to her. "Lily Edwards, I know you have already been married, and I know you carry Thomas in your heart. I would never ask you to forget him or to put away the ring he gave you. But I am asking if you would consider adding this ring and adding me to your life. Will you marry me?" Lily looked at the ring, then at him, and tears spilled down her cheeks. But she was smiling too, that radiant smile that made his world brighter. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Vincent, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her right hand, and she held it up to the light, admiring how it caught the sun. Then she held her left hand next to it, showing both rings together. "This one is my past," she said, touching Thomas's ring, "and this one is my future." She touched Vincent's ring. "Both are precious, and I will wear both always." Vincent pulled her close and kissed her properly, deeply, putting all his love and hope into it. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. "How soon can we get married?" Vincent asked. "Because I do not want to wait any longer than necessary." Lily laughed. "Let me at least have time to make a dress, and we should do it properly, in the church with our friends there." They settled on early October, which gave them a month to prepare. It was not a long engagement, but neither of them saw the point in waiting. They were both old enough to know what they wanted, and what they wanted was each other. The next month passed in a blur of preparation. Lily worked on her dress with help from Mrs. Patterson and some of the other women in town. Vincent cleaned up his ranch house and built an addition, adding a second bedroom for the children he hoped they would have. He also bought new furniture, wanting Lily to feel like the house was theirs together, not just his. The wedding was held on a crisp October morning with clear blue skies and leaves turning red and gold on the trees. The church was full of people, more than Vincent had expected. He stood at the front in a new suit, nervous and excited, watching the door for his bride. When Lily appeared, his breath caught. She wore a simple white dress with lace at the collar and sleeves, and her hair was pinned up with small white flowers tucked into it. She looked like an angel, and she was smiling at him like he was the only person in the world. Her friend, Sarah Brennan, walked with her down the aisle, and when she reached Vincent, she took his hand with complete confidence. The Reverend spoke about love and commitment, about the sacred bond of marriage and the importance of honoring each other. Vincent barely heard the words, too focused on Lily's face, on the joy and promise he saw there. When it came time for the vows, Vincent spoke as clearly and firmly, meaning every word. Lily's voice wavered slightly with emotion, but she got through them, squeezing his hands when she said, "I do." The Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, and Vincent kissed his bride to applause and cheers from the congregation. As they walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, Vincent felt like he was walking into a new life, leaving behind loneliness and grief for something better. The reception was held in the town square, with tables of food and music and dancing. Vincent danced with Lily until they were both dizzy, then danced some more. He accepted congratulations from townspeople he barely knew, shook hands until his arm ached, and ate more cake than he probably should have. But the best moment came late in the afternoon, when he and Lily finally climbed into the wagon to head to the ranch. As they pulled away, she leaned against his shoulder and sighed contentedly. "Happy?" he asked. "So happy," she replied. "I did not think I could feel this way again after losing Thomas, but you have given me a second chance at love, Vincent. I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for that." "You gave me a first chance," Vincent said. "I never really let anyone close before you. You taught me that it is possible to risk your heart and have it turn out well." They drove in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The prairie was painted in shades of amber and copper, beautiful and wild and endless. When they reached the ranch house, Vincent carried Lily over the threshold, laughing at the tradition even as he honored it. She looked around the interior with bright eyes, taking in all the changes he had made. "You built a whole room," she said, touching the doorframe to the new bedroom. For children, Vincent confirmed. "Someday when we are ready, I know you wanted them with Thomas, and I want you to have them now with me." Lily turned to him with tears in her eyes, but they were happy tears. "I love you, Vincent Nash." "I love you too, Lily Nash," he said, trying out her new name. It sounded right, like it had always been meant to be that way. That night in their home on the Kansas prairie, they began their life together. It was not perfect because life never is, but it was real and honest and full of hope. The first winter of their marriage was hard. A blizzard hit in December, trapping them in the house for nearly a week. They ran low on firewood and had to burn some of the furniture to stay warm. The cattle suffered, and Vincent lost several head to the cold. Money got tight, and there were days when Lily worried they had made a mistake trying to make a life on the ranch. But they got through it together. Vincent hunted rabbit and deer to supplement their food stores. Lily used her teaching skills to help organize the ranch's accounts and found ways to stretch their resources. They huddled together at night for warmth, talking and planning for spring. When the thaw finally came in March, they both felt like they had survived a test. The cattle that had made it through the winter were strong, and the land bloomed with new life. Vincent planted a vegetable garden near the house, and Lily tended it carefully, coaxing tomatoes and beans and squash from the rich soil. In May, Lily realized she was pregnant. She told Vincent one evening after dinner, too nervous to wait for a special moment. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He whooped with joy, picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down and fussed that he might have hurt her or the baby. "You cannot hurt me by hugging me," Lily laughed. "I am pregnant, not made of glass." But Vincent treated her like precious glass anyway. He would not let her lift anything heavy, insisted she rest in the afternoons, and rode into town weekly to buy whatever foods she was craving. Lily found it both exasperating and endearing, this strong man who had faced down bandits being nervous about a perfectly natural process. The pregnancy progressed normally. Lily continued to feel well through the summer, though the heat bothered her more than usual. She spent her days sewing baby clothes and preparing the new bedroom, painting it a cheerful yellow and making curtains for the window. Vincent built a cradle from oak wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk so there would be no chance of splinters. He carved a small horse into the headboard, a symbol of the ranch life their child would grow up knowing. In late January 1883, on a night when snow was falling softly outside, Lily went into labor. Vincent rode through the darkness to fetch the midwife, Mrs. Clara Johnson, his heart pounding with fear and excitement. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next afternoon. Vincent paced the kitchen, helpless and terrified, while Mrs. Johnson and her assistant worked in the bedroom. Finally, as the winter sun was starting to set, he heard a baby's cry. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Mrs. Johnson emerged a few minutes later with a smile on her tired face. "You have a son," she announced, "and your wife is asking for you." Vincent nearly ran to the bedroom. Lily was propped up against pillows, her hair damp with sweat and her face exhausted. But she was smiling, and in her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Vincent approached slowly, awed by the sight. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and eyes squeezed shut. He was so small, so impossibly fragile that Vincent was afraid to touch him. "Go on," Lily encouraged. "Hold him." With shaking hands, Vincent took his son. The weight was slight but felt immense, this new life that he and Lily had created together. The baby made a small sound and turned his head toward Vincent's chest, seeking warmth and safety. "He is perfect," Vincent whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "We are going to name him Daniel," Lily said. "After your brother, if that is all right with you." Vincent looked up at her, tears streaming down his face. "It is more than all right, it is perfect." Little Daniel grew strong and healthy. He had his mother's green eyes and his father's determination, crying lustily when he wanted something and settling immediately when he got it. Vincent and Lily adapted to the exhausting reality of having a newborn, taking turns with night feedings and learning to function on minimal sleep. The ranch work became harder with a baby to care for, but they managed. Vincent hired a young man named Pete to help with the heavy labor, and Lily learned to carry Daniel in a sling while she worked around the house and garden. As spring turned to summer and Daniel grew from a newborn into a sturdy infant, Vincent found himself happier than he had ever imagined possible. Watching Lily with their son, seeing the love and patience she brought to motherhood, made him fall in love with her all over again every single day. On their first wedding anniversary in October, Vincent gave Lily a rocking chair he had built himself. She sat in it with Daniel in her arms, rocking gently and looking out at the prairie sunset. "You ever miss teaching?" Vincent asked, sitting at her feet. "Sometimes," Lily admitted. "I loved working with the children, but this is where I am meant to be right now. With you and Daniel building our life together. Maybe someday when Daniel is older I can teach again, but for now this is enough, more than enough." "I never thanked you properly," Vincent said. "For what?" "For taking a chance on me. For seeing something in a lonely cowboy worth loving. For giving me a family when I thought I would spend my life alone." Lily reached down and touched his face gently. "You did not give me much choice. You rode out in the middle of the night to retrieve a stolen ring from dangerous men. How could I not fall in love with someone who would do that?" "It was just a ring," Vincent said. "It was never just a ring," Lily replied. "It was a symbol of love and commitment and everything good in the world. And you understood that. You risked yourself to restore something precious that had been taken. That is who you are, Vincent, someone who fights for what matters." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching their son sleep and the stars come out over the prairie. The night was cool but not cold, with the harvest moon rising orange and huge over the eastern horizon. "I want more children," Lily said suddenly. "I know Daniel is still so young, but I want him to have brothers and sisters. I want this house to be full of life and noise and love." Vincent smiled. "Then we will have more children, as many as you want." And they did. Over the next 8 years, 3 more children joined the Nash family. A daughter named Emma came 2 years after Daniel, followed by another son named Robert, and finally a daughter they named Grace. The ranch house expanded to accommodate them all, with Vincent adding rooms and Lily filling them with warmth and laughter. The years were not always easy. There were droughts that killed crops and forced them to buy expensive feed for the cattle. There were illnesses that kept them up at night, frightened for their children's lives. There were arguments about money and priorities, moments when they frustrated each other beyond measure. But through it all, the foundation they had built that first night when Vincent rode after the bandits held strong. They had started with an act of courage and compassion, and those qualities continued to define their relationship. Vincent never stopped being the man who would do anything to protect what mattered, and Lily never stopped being the woman who could find hope even in grief. Daniel grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Emma inherited her mother's gift for teaching and would sit her younger siblings down for lessons every afternoon. Robert was wild and adventurous, always getting into scrapes that required his parents' patience. And Grace, the youngest, was everyone's favorite, with her father's determination and her mother's kindness. By 1892, 10 years after their wedding, the Nash Ranch was one of the most successful in the county. Vincent had expanded his herd and bought additional land. He had earned a reputation as an honest dealer and a skilled rancher. But more than the material success, he had created a home filled with love. One evening in the summer of that year, Vincent and Lily sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Daniel, now 9, was teaching Emma and Robert how to throw a rope. Grace was picking wildflowers, her small hands gathering bouquets. "You ever think about that day in Salina?" Vincent asked. "When those bandits stole your ring?" Lily looked down at her hands. She still wore both rings, Thomas's gold band and Vincent's silver one, side by side on her left hand. "I think about it sometimes," she said. "About how one terrible moment led to everything good in my life now. If they had not stolen the ring, you would not have ridden after them. We might never have really talked, never have become friends and then more than friends. I like to think we would have found each other anyway," Vincent said. "Some things are just meant to be." "Maybe," Lily agreed, "but I am glad it happened the way it did. Because every time I look at this ring, I remember the man who cared enough about a stranger's pain to risk everything. And then I look at that man sitting beside me, and I remember how lucky I am." Vincent took her hand, running his thumb over the rings. "I am the lucky one. You gave me a reason to be more than just a man existing. You gave me a purpose, a family, a life worth living." Their children's laughter drifted up from the yard, mixing with the evening sounds of the prairie. Cattle lowing in the distance, birds settling in for the night, the eternal whisper of wind through grass. It was a good sound, a sound of peace and prosperity. "I love you, Lily Nash," Vincent said. "I love you too, Vincent Nash," Lily replied. "Always and forever." As the sun set over their ranch, painting the sky in brilliant streaks of red and gold, they sat together and watched their children play. The past had brought them both pain and loss, but it had also brought them here, to this moment, to this life they had built together. Somewhere in Vincent's mind, he remembered 3 bandits riding away from a campfire, a simple gold ring warm in his palm, and a woman's grateful smile. That night had changed everything. It had taken a stolen ring to show him what really mattered, to lead him to the love of his life. The ring itself sat now in a small wooden box that Lily kept on her dresser. She had finally taken off Thomas's ring after their 5th anniversary, feeling ready to let that particular symbol rest while she lived her life fully in the present. But she kept it safe, a reminder of first love and the journey that had led her to second love. Their children would grow up hearing the story of how their parents met, how their father had ridden through the night to retrieve a precious ring from bandits, how their mother had seen in that brave cowboy a man worth building a life with. It would become family legend, told and retold at gatherings and holidays. Daniel would eventually take over the ranch, marrying a girl from town and raising his own children on the same land where he had grown up. Emma would become a teacher, just as her mother had been, helping to educate a new generation of Kansas children. Robert would seek his fortune in the Colorado silver mines, finding adventure and eventually settling down with a widow who had 2 children of her own. And Grace would marry a doctor, moving to Topeka, but returning home often to visit. Vincent and Lily would grow old together on their ranch, watching their family expand with grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They would sit on that same porch in their later years, hands still clasped together, still in love after decades of marriage. When Vincent died in 1910 at the age of 68, it was in his sleep with Lily beside him. She followed him 2 years later, her heart simply giving out one quiet morning. They were buried side by side in the Salina Cemetery, under a shared headstone that read, "Together in life, together in eternity." But all of that was far in the future on that summer evening in 1892. For now they were still young, their children were healthy, and their love was as strong as it had ever been. The ranch thrived around them, testament to their hard work and dedication. As darkness fell and the children reluctantly came inside for supper, Vincent stood and helped Lily to her feet. They paused for a moment, looking out at the land they had claimed and tamed together. "No regrets?" Vincent asked. "Not a single one," Lily replied firmly. "This life, this family, you and me together, it is everything I ever wanted and more than I dared to hope for." They went inside to the chaos of feeding 4 hungry children, to the warmth of the home they had built, to the life they had fought for and earned. And if sometimes Lily touched her wedding rings and remembered a hot afternoon when bandits had stolen something precious, she also remembered the cowboy who had brought it back, and in doing so, had brought back her ability to love and trust and hope. That was the real gift Vincent had given her, not just a ring but a future. And she had given him the same, taking a lonely man and showing him he was worthy of love, capable of building something that would last. Their story was not unique in the Wild West. Many people found love in unexpected places, built lives out of hardship and determination. But for Vincent and Lily Nash, their story was everything. It was the foundation of their family, the proof that good could come from bad, that courage and compassion could change the course of lives. Years later, when their grandchildren would ask how Grandma and Grandpa fell in love, Lily would always smile and say, "It started with a ring and a cowboy brave enough to chase after 3 dangerous men to get it back. And it ended with 50 years of the truest love I have ever known." And Vincent, if he were still alive to hear it, would have smiled and squeezed her hand and known that every risk he had ever taken, every mile he had ridden, every moment of danger, had been worth it for the woman sitting beside him and the life they had created together. Sometimes the simplest act of kindness, one decision to help a stranger in need, could change everything. For Vincent Nash, that decision had given him everything he had ever wanted and things he had not even known to dream of. It had given him Lily and their children and a home filled with love. And in the end, what more could any man ask for than that?